Chapter 2136. After Zhao Yan finished speaking, there was silence. Cher was a little surprised, while Yi Muyun's expression didn't look too good. Only Song Karen's envious voice could be heard. You guys have such a good relationship. Even with their relationship, she and Yi Muyun didn't live together. From the bottom of her heart, she hoped that Zhao Yan's words could remind Yi Muyun. Nowadays, it was common for engaged couples to live together. Furthermore, they had been together for 2 to 3 years. Didn't he need it? If he had a need but didn't look for her, his girlfriend, to solve it, could it be through other channels? Song Karen thought a little too much. She looked at Yi Muyun timidly, hoping that he would be touched. Yi Muyun looked at her and said calmly, "I'll take you home." When the two groups separated, they seemed a little distracted. Yi Muyun sat in the car and watched Zhao Yan's car leave through the rearview mirror before starting the car. Perhaps Song Karen was too excited. She turned her face and joked, "Muyun, you and Annan grew up together, but Zhao Yan and she are related by blood. Their relationship is different. You seem to be jealous." Yi Muyun tightened his grip on the steering wheel and said, "Really?" Song Karen nodded and turned her head to say excitedly, "Ann is quite cute. She's the same age as me, but she looks like a little girl in her 20s. She paused for a moment and said carefully, "Will she call me sister in the future?" These words were equivalent to forced marriage. She knew that he might not be happy to say it, but she couldn't help it. "Muyun, I'm a little tired. All these years, I've been waiting for someone I like." Song Karen turned her head to confess. This wasn't being reserved, but she couldn't care less. Yi Muyun's car stopped outside her apartment. He didn't say anything and just looked at her. "Muyun, I want to have a family." Song Karen's voice was a little choked. "Are you willing?" He sat for a long time and said calmly, "I can't do it. Let's stop here." Song Karen's eyes widened. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. Yi Muyun's voice was calm. "I've thought about marrying you before, but I couldn't make the final decision." Song Karen's lips were trembling, and so was her voice. "So, you've never been in this relationship?" He sighed softly, "I'm sorry. I like someone and I've liked them for many years." Song Karen shook his head. "I don't want to hear this. Muyun, I can wait. I won't force you. I'll wait." She lowered herself to an infinitely lowly position, begging him to give her a chance. But he firmly refused. "Don't be like this." "But marriage needs love. You don't love me now, but it doesn't mean you won't love me in the future." She was like a trapped beast, her fingers holding his arm, tears falling down. As a terrible man who had wasted 2 years of her time, he could not be completely heartless towards her. Yi Muyun took a tissue for her and said in a low voice, "In this life, I'll probably only love one person. Why did you choose me, since you love her so much?" Song Karen murmured, still unable to accept this reality. For Yi Muyun, this was a difficult experience. Chapter 2137. If Cher didn't come back, maybe one day he would marry her. But the moment he saw Cher, all the blood in his body was revived. He knew that he had no feelings for Song Karen. He had been deceiving himself for the past 2 years. "I can only apologize," he said in a low voice. "I will make it up to you in my own way." Song Karen looked at his face and knew that he had made up his mind. She shook her head in a daze. "I don't want anything. I just want you." She wanted to get close to him, but she didn't dare. She could only look at him and cry. "I'm sorry." He apologized again and got out of the car. He opened the door for her personally. "I'll take you to the elevator." His words seemed considerate, but in reality, they were forceful. Song Karen's whole body was weak, so she got out of the car. She never thought that the happiest day of her life would end with a broken heart. When they got into the elevator, she looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Muyun, did you really not love me?" She didn't believe it. If there was no love, how could she be with someone for 2 years? Yi Muyun let out an N sound, and in return, Song Karen's tears fell like rain. But the elevator door was already closed. Yi Muyun stood outside the elevator quietly for a while, until Song Karen's elevator reached her floor. He had done his homework for tonight. He asked his secretary where Song Karen lived and which floor she lived on. He played the perfect boyfriend who had broken up with her. When they were together, he had never been nice to her. As for compensation, he had already prepared it. It was enough to save her 10 years of hard work. And if Song Karen was smart, she wouldn't announce to the media that they had broken up. That was exactly what he wanted. He turned around and got into the car. He smoked another cigarette and couldn't help but drive to the headquarters of GM Hotel. The car stopped and he walked into the lobby. The receptionist was stunned and stood up. "Mr. Yi, why are you here?" Yi Muyun's tone was indifferent. "Give me the key card to room 2608. The receptionist rejected him in her heart. "Mr. Yi, Miss Tang is staying there now. It might not be convenient." One was the crown prince, and the other was the princess. He couldn't afford to offend either of them. Yi Muyun didn't say anything and just glanced at her indifferently. The receptionist couldn't take it anymore. She obediently handed over the key card and whispered, "Mr. Yi, this is against the rules." Within the GMs, everyone knew that these two had collapsed. Furthermore, they had collapsed for many years. Mr. Yi has a girlfriend now, and he has Miss Tang's room card. What's the meaning of this? No one dared to ask. They could only watch as Yi Muyun went upstairs. When he stood at the door of the suite, Yi Muyun's facial muscles were a little twisted. He had seen her twice, but both times were in public. He couldn't do anything, let alone say anything. Now that he was here, truly alone, he really didn't know what he would do. He felt that there was a wild beast living in his heart, ready to pounce on her at any time. He unlocked the door, opened it, and entered. The light inside was dim, and there was an English country classical music playing. The air was filled with the faint scent of roses. There was also the sound of water. Yi Muyun stood at the door of the bathroom and confirmed his thoughts. She was asleep. Chapter 2138. There were pink flower petals floating in the bathtub, and that was where the faint fragrance was coming from. He squatted down and scooped up the water. He wasn't sure if it was the flower petals or her body that smelled good. At that moment, his body woke up, and he felt that he could drink her bathwater. His palms touched her uncontrollably, waking her up bit by bit. When Cher woke up, she was sitting in his arms. Almost immediately, she could feel the man's burning gaze behind her. Her little face was pulled to the back and he kissed her forcefully. It was hot and scalding. It was intense and lingering. She moaned as she looked at the handsome face in front of her with her eyes wide open. When she realized that it was him, she struggled violently. However, her strength was nothing compared to his. Very quickly, she was scooped up by him and laid in his arms in an unbearable position. He cupped her little face and kissed her again and again, so deeply that he almost kissed her soul. "Yi Muyun, you bastard." She had no choice but to bite him hard when his large palms were about to do evil things to her. He let go of her in pain. Cher swam to the other side. She started to curse at the perversely huge bathtub. She didn't even swim for a while before he caught her again. This time around, he didn't kiss her again. He just placed her on the edge of the bathtub and asked coldly, "Why do you want to stay here?" Cher's breathing was erratic as she stared at him. "Didn't Song Karen satisfy you? Did he let you go around provoking people like a wild beast?" "Wild beast?" He pinched her little chin with one hand. Just 2 fingers were enough to make her cry in pain. Who was the one who begged the wild beast to have her and not stop? He said mercilessly. Cher's face was pale and she was a little embarrassed. She didn't struggle anymore. After all, she had seen everything that she should have seen in the past. She was silent for a while before she actually laughed. "Yi Muyun, what do you miss about the past?" His face was a little pale. "Tang Cher?" She laughed so hard that tears rolled down her cheeks. "It's been 8 years, and you have a girlfriend now. You don't want to let her go. It's even funnier than your possessiveness in the past. Are you blaming me for leaving?" Cher lowered her head. "What can I do? Yi Muyun, tell me, can you watch Qin Mu die and then sweetly call Auntie Yi Mom?" She looked at him. "It's because of your extreme love. If not for it, we wouldn't have come this far." His expression became even more unsightly. So this was her true intention. It turned out that he hated her, and she also hated him. "Hate me?" he asked her softly. Cher lowered her eyes. After a while, she said in a low voice, maybe. After all, we were really in love at that time. His mouth was full of bitterness. He had so many things to say, but in the face of her few sentences, it was actually so pale. Mumu and Zhou Chongguang are getting a divorce. In the end, he squeezed out such a sentence. Cher pursed her lips and stirred the water in the bathtub with her hand. She said lightly, so what? That doesn't change anything. She smiled. I'm no longer an 18-year-old girl. I like my current life. His face turned pale. She said that she liked her current life. Did that mean that she was suffocated in the past? Chapter 2139. As he looked at her, his face twitched slightly. It wasn't like he hadn't seen this side of Cher before. At that time, she had used all her rationality on someone else. Not him. In front of him, she was always clumsy, like a little deer running around, and her heart was in a mess. But now, she was saying this to him calmly. He frowned. Cher laughed. Yi Muyun, what do you want me to do? Be your mistress? Or will you break up with Song Karen? He said hoarsely, what if I break up? She lowered her eyes. But I don't want to. He looked at her quietly, watching her calm look. At this moment, she didn't even have a decent piece of clothing on her. She was so calm. Yi Muyun propped himself up and leaned against the edge of the bathtub. He even wanted to smoke. He looked at her for a long time before getting up. His entire body was drenched in water, and his face was so gloomy that water could drip from it. Cher kept propping herself up and didn't slide down. After a long time, she finally cleaned herself up and walked out in her bathrobe. He hadn't left yet. She found a towel from somewhere and wrapped it around herself. His clothes were piled at the bathroom door. Yi Muyun reclined on the sofa in the living room, holding his cell phone in his hand. His gaze was deep. She walked over and sat down opposite him. She looked up and said, it's getting late. Chasing me away? His voice was hoarse. Cher laughed. Yi Muyun, shouldn't you stay away from others when you're with a girl? He looked at her and asked softly, have you become that other person too? Cher sighed and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window in the living room. She stretched out her arms and pulled the curtains open. The night view of B City was in full view. She stood there with her slender back straightened. He looked at her and knew that she was different from the past. That bashful little thing disappeared. His throat was a little choked up and he couldn't put it into words. But he didn't say anything. I know you hate me, but what do you hate me for? Her voice drifted over. Qin Mu is alive and well, and you are also well, and have a very good girlfriend. You think I'm doing well? His voice was hoarse. Cher was silent for a while before she said, are you okay? You made it through. She turned around and looked at him quietly. Her small body was wrapped in a bathrobe. She was very petite, but she seemed to be very powerful. Yi Muyun narrowed his eyes. He's not good at all. How could she think that he could live well after she left? He reached out but he couldn't touch her. She had always been so far away from him, just like 8 years ago. Yi Muyun smiled faintly. You've grown up now. Him coming here tonight was simply asking to be humiliated. However, he didn't forgive her either. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. Cher looked over. Yi Muyun said calmly, she's my secretary. He walked over to open the door and let the person come in. But when that person came in, Cher was stunned. Zheng Sini? She murmured. Zheng Sini had changed a lot. She was much prettier, but Cher could still recognize her. She had actually become Yi Muyun's secretary. This was ridiculous. Chapter 2140. Faced with Cher's shock, Zheng Sini was much calmer. She just smiled and said, Tang Cher, long time no see. Cher stood there and didn't respond immediately. She looked at Zheng Sini and her eyes were even a little cold. Is there a problem? Zheng Sini was still smiling. Do you think it's a little unbelievable that I, who stayed back for a year, became the secretary of Boyisio? Cher calmed down and looked at the ambitious woman in front of her. She chuckled and said, it's quite unbelievable. She didn't say much, but Zheng Sini couldn't figure out the truth in her heart, and her face was a little pale. Yi Muyun took the bag from Zheng Sini's hand and said calmly, "Secretary Zheng, wait for me outside." Zheng Sini pursed her lips and left. After she left, Yi Muyun looked at Cher. "Don't you want to ask why I want to use her?" Cher turned around and looked at the night view outside for a long time before she said calmly, "Why do I have to ask? It's something you've decided long ago." He looked at her back view and suddenly suppressed his voice. "Does everything in B City have nothing to do with you? It's your private business. It has nothing to do with me." Her voice was very soft. "Yi Muyun, take your secretary and get out of here right now. Do I make you feel disgusted?" He stared at her back, probably because he wanted to make her feel uncomfortable. Cher suppressed herself. "Yes, it's disgusting. But I think Song Karen will feel even more disgusted if he knows." She opened the window. Because they were on the top floor, the wind poured in as soon as it came down. It was so strong that it could almost blow them over. Yi Muyun had just changed his clothes and stepped forward to close the window. He looked at her coldly. "Are you crazy? It's none of your business," she said almost willfully. "Get lost." However, Yi Muyun suddenly grabbed her shoulder and pushed her towards the French window behind him. Her slender back bumped into the cold, hard glass, and it hurt. Behind him was a bone-chilling cold, and in front of him was a bone-piercing heat. Yi Muyun's palm was enough to hold her down. His dark eyes were deep. "Does it have nothing to do with you?" He lowered his head and whispered into her ear, "Then why do you look so angry?" His thin lips moved down and he bit her lightly, causing her to moan in pain. "I'm not Zhou Chongguang. I won't mess around with a female secretary." His voice was secretive. Cher leaned against the glass, her body trembling slightly. She would also be afraid of falling. But when she struggled, it was as if she was getting closer to him, forcing herself into his embrace. She did not move and her body was almost frozen. She narrowed her eyes and glared at him. "I said it has nothing to do with me." He stared at her for a long time before she took a breath. "Yi Muyun, the person I liked before is not a despicable man. Let's keep the good times we had in the past. I'm glad that you still have praise for me in your little mouth," he said with some mockery, and then he let go of her. The moment he let go, Cher ran to the sofa and hugged a wool blanket. Her little face was buried in the wool blanket, revealing only a pair of eyes. He glanced at her and didn't say anything else. He walked out directly. Chapter 2141. But no matter how much she scolded him, he couldn't hear it. When Yi Muyun walked out, Zheng Sini was still guarding the door. When she saw him come out, she immediately straightened up and maintained her best posture. "Mr. Yi, you can go back first." Yi Muyun's voice was indifferent. Zheng Sini pursed her lips. "Mr. Yi, I think I'd better send you back. I'm worried about you like this." Yi Muyun looked at her quietly for 2 seconds before saying, "Do you know why I called you here?" There were so many people who could have sent him clothes. Why did he look for her? The moment he asked this question, Zheng Sini's expression turned ugly. The smile froze on her lips. She was well aware of his intentions. He was just using her to make Tang Cher feel uncomfortable, but she still had a Cinderella dream. She still thought that she could show off in front of Tang Cher, but she was wrong. At most, she was just a chess piece. Moreover, her boss didn't mind letting her know what she was used for, so she gave up on that idea long ago. Zheng Sini was indignant, but she couldn't do anything about it. Yi Muyun was invulnerable. She even suspected that Song Karen had used despicable means to stay by Yi Muyun's side. But later, she understood, Song Karen was just a substitute. Or rather, not a substitute at all, but just a decoration. Yi Muyun had a girlfriend, but he still lived like a monk. She could imagine how awkward it must have been for this girlfriend. However, Song Karen was very interested, so she didn't want to expose her beautiful dream. Look, Tang Cher came back, and Song Karen immediately had to stand aside. Zheng Sini smiled lightly, but her smile was bitter. She didn't know when she had changed the direction of her life. By the time she realized it, there was no way out. When she came back to her senses, Yi Muyun had already walked far away. Zheng Sini stood there quietly for a while before leaving in her high heels, Upstairs, Cher stood alone on the top floor. Her small body exuded a sense of loneliness. After a long time, her phone rang. She walked over and took a look. It was Song Karen. Why is she calling at this hour? Cher's intuition told her that it wasn't related to the art exhibition. It should be a private matter. If it was a private matter, then it was related to Yi Muyun. She pursed her lips and answered, "Miss Song." Song Karen stared blankly for a moment, then said with red eyes, "And don't alienate me like this." Cher's voice was indifferent. "We're partners to begin with. There's no problem with that." Song Karen took a deep breath and said, "But I feel terrible right now. And let's go out for a drink, okay?" "What's up?" Cher was indifferent. After discovering the relationship between Song Karen and Yi Muyun, she had already decided to stop working with Song Karen. However, she wouldn't talk about business at night. Song Karen was a little cold, but she felt that Anne was the most suitable candidate, so she had to find her. In the end, Cher agreed and made an appointment at a bar. After hanging up the phone, she changed her clothes and went out. The bar wasn't very far from here. It was a 10-minute walk, so Cher didn't drive. When she reached there, she was surprised to find Song Karen already there, and she was half drunk. Her white chiffon dress was gently pulled open, revealing a little spring. Cher walked over and sat opposite her. "What's wrong?" She didn't want to deal with Song Karen, but she had no choice tonight. Chapter 2142. Song Karen drank a little too much. She looked up at Cher with a mug in her hand, laughing and crying, and "He broke up with me." Cher was shocked in her heart, but she still looked calm on the surface. Her lips moved slightly. "Why?" Song Karen smiled gently. "He said he liked someone for a long time, and that he couldn't fall in love with me." As she spoke, Song Karen cried out, "And do you know that I've been with him for 2 years? I can't lose him." She held Cher's arm tightly and said anxiously, "Do you think he wouldn't break up with me if I took the initiative and got pregnant with his child?" Shueyer's arm had turned purple from her pinching, and it hurt. She felt a little ridiculous in that pain. Tonight Yi Muyun first, and then Song Karen took turns to torture her mentally. Why did they treat her like this? And did Yi Muyun think that they could be together if he broke up with her? Everything had changed. She couldn't say that she had completely forgotten him, but she was afraid. She didn't dare to touch him easily. Her voice was low and light. "Maybe you can give it a try." Song Karen was stunned. "And I thought you were trying to persuade me not to do this?" Cher suppressed her voice. "If you love someone, you'll try your best to keep him, by hook or by crook, right? Just like her and Yi Muyun in the past. He chose her at that time. In fact, he had always chosen Qin Mu. They were both his biological sisters. He didn't really make up his mind. She just helped him make up his mind." Cher thought self-deprecatingly she was the victim. She had escaped abroad for 8 years. Why did she have to suffer like this when she came back? Let them have their children. Let them have as many as they want. Her heart ached a little, but she didn't care. Anyway, it had been so painful for so long. It didn't matter if it hurt a little more. Song Karen was still in shock. Then she smiled and poured a glass for Cher, and "Give me courage." Cher looked at the mug on the counter and smiled. She picked it up and drank it in one gulp. Song Karen clapped his hands and laughed maniacally. "Great, and we have to celebrate today." "What are you celebrating?" Cher smiled faintly. Her face was slightly flushed, but she was not drunk. She was no longer that little girl who would get drunk after drinking a little. Song Karen propped her chin on her elbow and smiled foolishly. "To celebrate the smooth opening of our gallery and the fact that I was dumped by a man today." Snow poured herself another cup and said without batting an eyelid, "To celebrate your wish being fulfilled." Song Karen suddenly leaned close to Cher and said in a warm voice, "And do you have any experience?" Cher looked at her. "Will it hurt?" Song Karen was really drunk. She dared to say anything. "And Mu Yun, is there something wrong with him? Why doesn't he touch me?" Cher's body trembled. Song Karen's smile was intoxicating. "But I'm not afraid of pain. What I'm most afraid of is him leaving me." There were already a few ANs in front of her, but Song Karen was still drinking. She was drunk. Cher looked at her lying on the floor and shook her head. Let me send you back. She reached out to support Song Karen and called a taxi outside the bar. Chapter 2143. Before Cher could say anything, Song Karen had already told the driver an address. Cher didn't think much about it and asked the driver to go there. It's not good for two girls to drink like this. It's dangerous. The middle-aged driver said warmly, don't use the DD Express at this time. It's not safe for beautiful girls like you. Cher just smiled. I'm not drunk. You're drunk. I said you're not drunk. The driver chuckled. Cher didn't explain anymore. Alcohol had become numb to her. No one knew that she used to numb herself with alcohol all day long. Only when she was drunk could she control herself from returning to that person and stopping herself from looking for him. Sometimes when she woke up, she almost didn't know where she was. She had also lived a ridiculous life for more than a year. Without her brother and Yi Muyun, she didn't know how to live. At that time, she suspected that her body was full of alcohol. At that time, she would rather die than live. Later, alcohol had no effect on her. No matter how much she drank, she was always sober. Later, she stopped drinking, she learned painting and locked herself up for more than 2 years. Slowly, she finally calmed down. Years. Cher leaned her head against the window and refused to think too much. The driver drove to the apartment that Song Karen mentioned and helped her get out of the car. Cher paid the driver. Wait downstairs for 10 minutes. I'll go back to the GM hotel later. The driver heard this and said, that's where the rich live. But looking at this apartment, only the rich in B City could afford to live in it. The location was absolutely first class. 1 square meter cost more than 200,000 yuan. 100 square meters would cost 20 or 30 million yuan. Cher didn't say anything. She simply helped the drunken Song Karen up the stairs. When the elevator reached the top floor, Song Karen leaned against the door and smiled seductively. And, thank you for taking me to Mu Yun's home, she yawned. Goodbye. What happened next is not suitable for children. Cher narrowed her eyes. Only then did she realize that this was not Song Karen's home, but Yi Muyun's. Her facial muscles twitched unnaturally. She forced a smile and retreated into the elevator. When the elevator doors closed, Song Karen's alluring smile was still in front of her. She thought that no man could refuse a woman's request, let alone a drunk woman. The elevator went straight down. 1 minute passed, but she felt that the time was especially long. It was only a minute, but it felt as long as a century. When she walked out of the elevator, she felt a chill on her face. She reached out to touch it, but it was cold tears. Only then did she realize that she had cried. Why was she crying? She didn't know. It was like she was in a dream, and she didn't want to wake up. The taxi was still waiting, and there was a small red light on the roof. These tiny specks of light were simply salvation for her. Cher immediately opened the door and got into the car. Let's go. The middle-aged driver smiled as he drove, willing to chat with the beautiful girl. This little girl was a lot more beautiful than before, and she had an indescribable temperament. Your colleagues with that little girl just now? The middle-aged driver asked in a very gossipy manner. Cher looked at the flickering lights and shadows outside the window. Hearing the driver's words, she withdrew her gaze. No, she's my boss. The driver laughed dryly. You must be joking. How could that be possible? Chapter 2144. It was obvious that this young lady came from a wealthy family. She was a far cry from the drunk girl just now. Perhaps they used to be rivals in love, Cher mumbled. The person I used to like is now with her. The driver was stunned for a moment. Then he swallowed hard. You young people are really brave. If it were back in our days, if we met a rival in love who was drunk like this, we would have thrown her on the street and gotten someone to kill her. Cher was in a low mood, but she was amused at this moment. Is she really that good? Of course. The middle-aged driver nodded affirmatively. At that time, there were 2 girls in my village who got into a fight because of me. It was really intense. They fought from the front of the village to the back of the village, and from the back of the village to the front of the village. I was in a dilemma. The driver smiled warmly. They were both good-looking. I was really in a dilemma for a while. Cher also smiled. The middle-aged driver sighed. Young lady, it's better if you don't smile. You might as well cry. No one will laugh at you. You look uglier when you smile than when you cry. Snow reached out and gently touched her cheeks. There were tears in her eyes. After a long time, she said softly, I've long forgotten how to cry. Because when she cried, there was no one else she could rely on. The driver was speechless. He sighed again. Men are like clothes. Don't worry too much about them. The next one will be better. Cher nodded and didn't say anything else. On the other side, Song Karen was banging on the door with all her might, calling out Yi Muyun's name. When Yi Muyun came out to open the door, he was a little surprised. He stood at the door, wearing a bathrobe. However, he blocked the door and had no intention of letting Song Karen in. Song Karen looked at him and was stunned at first. Then, she worshipped him with her eyes and mumbled drunkenly, Mu-yun, are you happy to see me? She was clearly drunk, and it was obvious that she was quite drunk. How did you get here? He frowned. Song Karen smiled a little foolishly. Anan sent me here. I said I wanted to be pregnant with your child, so she sent me here. Yi Muyun's eyes narrowed. Cher? Song Karen's whole body hung on him, her face resting on his shoulder. Her voice was very low. Mu-yun, I don't want to break up. Let's be together, okay? She lifted her head, eager to kiss him. However, he avoided it. Yi Muyun's voice was very calm. You drank too much. We have already broken up. But Anan said that as long as we have children, we can be together forever. Song Karen looked hurt. Mu-yun, you said that you like me. He closed his eyes. He had never said that. Song Karen's gaze blurred. Suddenly, she took off her skirt and let it fall beside her feet like an umbrella. She didn't block herself and just looked up at him. Her voice was soft and dreamy. Mu-yun, let's be together, okay? Forget that person. I'll be a very good wife. Put on your clothes. He pushed her away without any pity. Song Karen took 2 steps back, feeling a little embarrassed. She was also a little sober. She looked around and saw his ashen face. She slowly came back to her senses. She also realized that she had angered him. However, this was all because she loved him. Mu-yun, please take me. She suddenly knelt at his feet, hugged his leg and said meekly. Chapter 2145. Yi Muyun did not look too good as he looked down at the woman who was begging him. He was angry, but not at Song Karen. He was angry at that damn Tang Cher who sent her here. But now, he had to get rid of Song Karen. Song Karen was staying here by herself. It was obviously inhumane to kick her out like this. Yi Muyun thought for a moment, bent down, and slashed the back of her neck. Song Karen fell down softly. He picked her up and walked straight in, arranging her in the guest room. When he came out, he looked at the bright lights outside through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His heart was as calm as still water. He did not sleep. He stood there quietly, as if he could see through the darkness and see the person he was thinking of. He stood there for the whole night. It was not until dawn that Song Karen woke up. She opened her eyes and looked at the clothes on her body. She was stunned for a while and felt slightly disappointed. She smelled again. Oh, it smelled terrible. After thinking for a while, she went to the bathroom to take a shower. She dried her hair and came out wearing only a bathrobe. The sky was already bright. Yi Muyun stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. He was wearing the same white bathrobe as her. Song Karen had sobered up and returned to normal. But in her heart, she still could not bear to leave him. She walked over barefoot, hugged his firm waist from behind, and rested her face on his back. Song Karen's voice was clear and light. Mu-yun, let's not break up, okay? I'll agree to whatever you say. I won't force you to get married. I just want to be by your side. He did not break away from her immediately. It could be considered as giving her one last tenderness. He said hoarsely, I'll make it up to you. From the beginning to the end, he knew very well what kind of role Song Karen had played. Song Karen shook her head vigorously behind him. Mu-yun, I don't want any compensation. I only want you. Her slender arms tightened, and her red lips whispered seductively, Let's be together, okay? She kissed his back, but he did not move. Song Karen kissed him, and her red lips kissed his chin seductively, moving up along his good-looking chin. The moment their lips touched, Yi Muyun slowly said, "Enough." Song Karen was unwilling to stop. She tiptoed and kissed him infatuatedly. "Mu Yun, am I not good enough?" She even suspected that there was something wrong with him. Otherwise, why didn't he have any reaction when she was like this? Song Karen didn't want to believe it. Her slender fingers moved downwards. Then she froze. He clearly did that. She raised her head and murmured softly, "Why do I have to endure? Why do I have to suppress?" Yi Muyun gently pushed her away, his face cold. It's just a man's reaction when he gets up in the morning. If it doesn't, it means there's something wrong with me. After being kissed like this by a woman, he wouldn't be a man if he didn't have any reaction. Song Karen's gaze immediately dimmed and his lips trembled slightly. To her, this was a form of humiliation. His body clearly wanted her, but he didn't touch her. "I'll have someone send some clothes over," Yi Muyun said indifferently. He took out his cell phone and dialed Zheng Sini's number. He had only said one sentence when Song Karen slapped his cell phone onto the ground. She had never been so daring before. She looked at him, panting and pursing her lips tightly. "I don't want it." Yi Muyun looked at her quietly. His voice was indifferent. "My patience is limited." Chapter 2146. Yi Muyun didn't say anything. He just picked up his phone and said to Zheng Sini calmly, "Send a set of clothes over." Zheng Sini was stunned for a moment. "Mr. Yi, where is it? And the size?" Yi Muyun glanced at Song Karen and said calmly, "It's Miss Song." Zheng Sini was stunned again. Had Mr. Yi decided to be with Song Karen for real? He was at Tang Sher's place yesterday. Had he changed again last night? Zheng Sini was happy to see such a change. She immediately prepared the clothes and sent them to Yi Muyun's apartment. When she arrived, she rang the doorbell. It was Yi Muyun who came out to open the door, still in his bathrobe. Zheng Sini pursed her lips and handed him the bag. Yi Muyun said calmly, "I'll send Miss Song back in a while." Zheng Sini guessed that Song Karen's wishful thinking last night was probably one-sided. She pursed her lips and stood guard outside. Yi Muyun closed the door and put the paper bag on the table. "Get changed." Song Karen looked at him. When he spoke, his eyes didn't fall on her. They had been together for 2 years, but now they were still like strangers. Song Karen choked with sobs. "Mu Yun, is there really no possibility between us?" He didn't say anything. Song Karen bit her lips and finally changed her clothes and left. When she walked to the door, she saw Zheng Sini. Song Karen wasn't very familiar with this secretary. And instinctively, she didn't like Zheng Sini either. She always felt that there was too much ambition in her eyes. No woman would like their boyfriend to have a secretary who was too capable. Song Karen was the same. So after she went out, she didn't talk to Zheng Sini. She just sat in the car and looked out of the window. Zheng Sini held the steering wheel and smiled casually. "Miss Song, do you know Mr. Ye's past?" Song Karen tilted his head and looked at Zheng Sini. Zheng Sini smiled faintly. "Unfortunately, I know." Song Karen's gaze was burning. "You know about it?" Her voice sounded a little arrogant. From the bottom of her heart, she looked down on Zheng Sini, because she was just a secretary. "Yes," Zheng Sini said calmly. "Mr. Yi loved a girl, and he loved her for many years." Song Karen started to believe her a little. Biting her lower lip, she asked, "How did they get separated?" Zheng Sini gave a hollow laugh. "It's hard to imagine that Mr. Yi would be ditched." "That's not what I want to hear." Song Karen's voice was somewhat angry. At this moment, it happened to be a red light. Zheng Sini stopped the car, turned her head and smiled. "I'm afraid that you won't be able to take it if I tell you all at once. After all, this news is even more shocking to you than Mr. Yi breaking up with you." "Who is she?" Song Karen narrowed his eyes and said firmly. Zheng Sini looked at the flashing red lights in front of her. Her lips curled into a cold smile. "That person is back." Song Karen was stunned and said very slowly, "So, he wants to break up with me?" It turned out that after so long, She was just a spare tire. Now that the person in his heart was back, she immediately lost her value. Was it because he was afraid of misunderstanding, so he couldn't wait to break up with her? Song Karen closed her eyes, unwilling to believe such cruelty. Chapter 2147. She sneered and said word by word, "Who is the one who just returned to the country? Who is the one who is devastatingly beautiful? Who is the one who made So Yi unable to control himself and everything went wrong?" Zheng Xini said a few words and Song Karen was completely stunned. She murmured, "It's En, and Mu Yun knew each other. She was beautiful enough. It was her. It was actually her." Song Karen laughed and cried at the same time. Gosh, how silly was she to say that she wanted to seduce Yi Muyun in front of Enin. In the end, Enin was the one who sent her to Yi Muyun's apartment. Why didn't Enin talk about their past? Why did she watch her make a fool of herself? She knew that Yi Muyun still had feelings for her. Why did she humiliate her like this? Song Karen clenched her fists and didn't say a word. Zheng Xini smiled. She didn't admit or deny it. The car drove all the way back to Song Karen's apartment. When Song Karen got out of the car, her legs were weak. The car window wound down and Zheng Xini said calmly, "Miss Song, I just don't want to see you trying to redeem her like a fool." They grew up together and were engaged. Mr. Yi loved Tang Sher for almost 20 years. They only broke up temporarily, but Mr. Yi can't forget her. With that, Zheng Xini rolled up the car window and drove away. Song Karen stood there and chuckled, "Yeah, 20 years. How can I compare with her?" They broke up and she was destined to be cannon fodder? Why did Enin come back? Why would a man and woman who broke up meet again? "So, I'm a fool." Song Karen chuckled. "I actually invited her back with my own hands, and came back because she knew that she was Yi Muyun's girlfriend, right? Then, what are your intentions?" Song Karen's eyes were filled with hatred. She returned to her apartment and looked at her face in the mirror. It was so beautiful, but it couldn't attract Yi Muyun. Song Karen smiled faintly and took out a small pipette from his medical bag. He faced the mirror and did something to his neck. "And I will not allow myself to lose so badly." After she was done, she looked at the red mark on her neck. It looked like a hickey. Her smile deepened as her fingers gently stroked the red marks. Her voice was especially soft as she said, "If Enin sees this, she'll definitely feel terrible." As she spoke, her smile was a little strange. As he stared at his neck, he made a call to Snow. Gem Hotel. Cher didn't fall asleep until dawn. When her phone rang, she instinctively wanted to stuff it under her pillow, but the phone kept ringing. She had no choice but to pick it up. It was a call from Song Karen, and it was also a call that she didn't want to answer the most right now. She did not make a sound. Song Karen's excited voice could be heard from the other side of the phone. "And last night, did I get pregnant?" Cher rubbed her aching head. There was no expression on her face. After a while, she said softly, "Maybe." Song Karen suddenly turned from a smart and capable woman to a little girl. "Last night? He did it 5 times? 5 times? Cher was a little dazed. She smiled absent-mindedly and said slowly after a long time, "Congratulations." Chapter 2148. Cher lay flat and put her fingers on her eyes. After a while, she said softly, "I have something to talk to you about." Song Karen smiled. "Shall we have lunch together?" Finally, they decided on the time and place. Cher threw her cell phone away and covered her face with the quilt. She lay there for a long time but could not fall asleep. She simply sat up and leaned against the headboard in a daze. They had done it. 5 times. She touched her eyes with her fingertips and her fingers were trembling. At this moment, she felt that all her memories of the past with him had disappeared. Her palm-sized face rested on her knees and her eyes were cautious. At this moment, she seemed to have become an 18-year-old girl again. At this moment, she felt that she had finally lost him. Completely lost. In fact, she had lost him long ago, hadn't she? Cher smiled, but her long eyelashes blinked and a tear fell. When she went out at noon, her face was very pale because she had not slept well. She had to put on some honey powder, but she was still not angry. "What do I care? Maybe this is the last time we meet. Cher smiled at the mirror. Maybe I won't come back to City B anymore. Maybe I shouldn't have come back. Cher picked a white Lamborghini from the underground parking lot of GM and drove to the restaurant where she had an appointment with Song Karen. The car stopped and she got out of the car and walked in. Song Karen was already there. She was sitting there and ordering food gently. When Snow sat down, she heard Song Karen say very gently to the waiter that there was another gentleman who would be arriving a little later, and that his dishes would be served in half an hour. When she said this, Song Karen's eyes seemed to sparkle with countless little stars, filled with love. Also, the hickeys on her neck were so big and entrenched on her fair skin. She could imagine how crazy they had been last night. Cher lowered her head and laughed at herself 5 times. She pursed her lips and waited quietly for Song Karen to order. "And what do you want? What do you want?" Song Karen suddenly turned his head and asked. Cher said calmly, "A sturgeon set meal." Song Karen exclaimed softly, "You have the same taste as Mu Yun." On the other side, the waiter looked at the order machine in his hand with a puzzled expression. It was clearly different, all right? However, the customer was God, so he naturally wouldn't say it out loud. Cher only smiled faintly. "Really?" Song Karen smiled sweetly and said a few words to the waiter before turning around. "And did you drink too much last night? Did you sleep well after you got home?" Cher shook her head. "I only drank a little. It's okay. But I see. You don't look well." Song Karen said with concern. "Thank you for your hard work, Anne." She puts her palm on the back of Cher's hand. "I really don't know what to do without you." Cher remained silent. Song Karen continued, looking a little shy. "Although there's someone else in Mu Yun's heart, he accepted me last night. I think we'll be together." She placed her finger on her lower abdomen. "If we can have a child, will he propose to me?" Cher's expression was indifferent. "I think so. I think so too." Song Karen directly turned into a naive and sweet person. "And you don't know how charming his expression is when he loves me. Although it's a little rough, but..." Chapter 2149. She lowered her voice and said, "It hurts the first time, but afterwards, it feels good." She then frowned and said, "Don't you think he's very experienced?" Cher didn't want to talk about this with her because every word was stabbing at her heart. However, Song Karen, who was immersed in her own happiness, didn't seem to notice her strangeness and continued to say sweetly, "I believe he will fall in love with me in the future." Cher smiled even more lightly. She held the water in her hand and took a sip. That plain water also had a bitter taste. Song Karen flipped her curly hair and said seductively, "And, do you mind being Mu Yun and my bridesmaid? You're so beautiful that you'll definitely charm a lot of people." "Maybe so." Cher said calmly, "I'll be returning to America in 2 days. I've thought about the gallery's matter carefully. I still don't like to be tied down. So, after this exhibition, our collaboration will end." Song Karen's eyes widened and she looked shocked. "And we agreed. Do you think the conditions aren't good enough or that my scale isn't big enough?" She said anxiously, "Mu Yun said he would invest and will only get better and better." Cher looked down and said, "My focus is still in America." She raised her face and let out a faint smile. "That's it then. I'll skip dinner. I have an appointment later." As she spoke, she stood up and prepared to leave. Song Karen stood up almost immediately and reached out to hold Cher's hand. "And, do you have a problem with me?" "No," Cher said calmly, "I'm just not used to life in B City." At this moment, she was like a deserter who couldn't wait to escape back to America and treat her wounds like she did 8 years ago. She was the one who sent Song Karen to his apartment. Song Karen got what he wanted, but her heart hurt. The wound that she thought had healed turned out to be never healed. Now, she felt that it was bleeding. Song Karen had a look of pity on his face. He stared into her eyes and slowly said, "If that's the case, I'll lose the best artist." Cher forced a smile. "I'm not the best." Song Karen continued to look into her eyes with sincerity, "And, in my heart, you are the best. Your painting of a rainy night is the most profound painting I have ever seen." Cher shook her head gently, already planning to burn it later. That kind of rainy night would never happen again. Why would she keep it? She took 2 steps back and pursed her lips. Goodbye, Miss Song. Song Karen hugged her. And I'll miss you. However, Snow could vaguely smell Yi Muyun's scent on her body. It was the scent of the cologne that he was used to using. How long did they linger after they put on their clothes at dawn? That kind of crazy imagination flashed through her mind again and again. When she left, her heart was full of sorrow. Behind her, Song Karen's eyes became cold. Zheng Sini was wrong. Not only did Yi Muyun still love but had never forgotten Yi Muyun in her heart. She was the only one who was a fool. Now, and thought that she had slept with Yi Muyun and escaped back to America. She thought that it was a powerful opponent, but it was just a little girl. Chapter 2150. She had underestimated Yi Muyun's 8 years of yearning and hatred. How could it be erased with a single kiss? She sat at the dining table and placed lunch for 3 on the table while Song Karen ate alone. She ate with extreme elegance. Just like in love, she had to fight off her opponent gracefully. Not only did she want her to scram back to America, she wanted her to have no place in the art world. Song Karen thought of that rainy night, and chuckled out gently as she swallowed a spoonful of salad. Plagiarizing the work of an international master was a sensational scandal. Cher walked out of the restaurant without driving. That was because she knew that something bad would happen if she were to drive. She walked slowly on the streets. The sky had darkened and it was raining, but she did not notice it at all. The raindrops drenched her petite face, and there was a line of water droplets on her eyelashes. She raised her head. The sky was gray, and it was raining. It was just like that rainy night. Was the sky crying as well? She laughed at herself for being silly. After so many years, she had clearly said that she didn't care. Why was she crying when he slept with someone else for a night? Tang Cher, he didn't belong to you since a long time ago. Why did you still care so much? At this moment, she was that 18-year-old girl, the girl who had been abandoned. She suddenly felt like crying out loud. On the streets of B City. She squatted down slowly and hugged her knees tightly. She had thought that she was strong enough, but she couldn't even withstand a single blow. Tang Cher, you promised to make him happy and not disturb him. She cried and ignored the strange gazes of the passers-by. A black limousine came to a stop beside her, and a pair of long legs stepped out. Zhou Chongguang was dressed elegantly. He was supposed to be attending an important dinner, but he caught sight of her. He had initially thought that it was just her back view and hair. But when she raised her head, he was stunned. Tengshi. He called out her name subconsciously. Time froze. He looked at this girl who was doted on by time. She still looked like she was 18 years old and had not changed at all. His heart was ruthlessly struck. The place that he thought was already hard became soft and powerless. After so many years, he was used to seeing all kinds of women who looked like her. Some had similar eyebrows, some eyes, and some lips. He had enjoyed them one by one, but now he realized that none of them could compare to her. She was still herself, but those women were not like her at all. He slowly walked closer and squatted down. His fingers gently touched her little face. It was cold. As if possessed, he asked, "Are you lost?" He remembered that she didn't know the way and was always confused. Was she unable to find her way home now? Cher looked up and saw Zhou Chongguang. He had changed. He was no longer the same as before. He had become a complete businessman, and she felt strange. She said softly, "I can't find Yi Muyun." She was still lying on the ground, her face tilted as she stared at him. "You're the one who prevented me from finding him." As Cher said that, she stood up slowly and raised her hand. Just like that, a slap landed on Zhou Chongguang's handsome face. He received that slap head-on. "I've said it before, if you were to mess around with Gu Mei, I'll never let you off, neither will I." Cher pursed her lips and laughed out coldly. "But you've ruined Qin Mu for so many years." Zhou Chongguang wiped his lips gently and chuckled out. "Do you still understand her now?" Qin Mu had long since stopped caring. Chapter 2151. Cher stared into Zhou Chongguang's eyes for a long time before she suddenly smiled. Zhou Chongguang, I don't need to understand. Just as they had said, Qin Mu was going to divorce him. In the end, she still had nothing. Cher propped herself up and stood up slowly, facing Zhou Chongguang on the cold street. Time seemed to have returned to 8 years ago, when she had no choice but to protect him. And 8 years later, all that was left was hatred. Zhou Chongguang, you once had everything but you didn't cherish it, or perhaps you thought it wasn't worth cherishing? Cher's voice was cold. Some people spend their entire lives just to have someone who loves them. And Zhou Chongguang had easily destroyed everything, turning her sacrifice into a joke. Zhou Chongguang looked at her in a daze and said in a hoarse voice, Tang Cher, can we be friends again? Cher laughed softly. Zhou Chongguang, what do you think? Zhou Chongguang's face was ashen. After a long time, he smiled and said, You're right. A person like me doesn't deserve to have friends. How could she still be friends with him after he had taken away her happiness? He had been too naive for once. Zhou Chongguang smiled and looked around. I'll send you back. You don't look well. I'll walk alone no matter what, Cher said calmly. Then she turned around and walked in the opposite direction. She left without any hesitation. Zhou Chongguang, on the other hand, was still standing at his original place, watching the whole time. It was as if he had returned to the past, to the days when he was still in school. It was drizzling, but Zhou Chongguang felt that it couldn't wash away his sins. All these years, he had regretted it, especially when she hadn't come back for 8 years. He wondered if he had done something wrong. Was it too cruel to her? At that time, she was only an 18-year-old girl, but because of his anger, her life changed. When they met again, she was the same as before, just a little calmer. He thought of Qin Mu, his wife. The one who changed the most was probably Qin Mu. From loving him to not loving him. Zhou Chongguang suddenly raised his voice and stared at the distant figure. Tang Cher, do you still love him? The first thing that responded to him was her stiff back. Cher stopped, but she didn't turn around. She stood there for so long that he thought she would not speak. Then she said, Zhou Chongguang, if love is so easy to erase, then it is not love. Zhou Chongguang's body trembled. Is that so? If it's easy to erase, then it's not love. What about Qin Mu? Was she the same, unable to be erased? But he actually minded that it was erased. Was it because she didn't love him that much in the past? Zhou Chongguang was a little confused. He stood there in a daze, watching the slender figure leave. Snow walked faster and faster, faster and faster. Then she cried, Damn Zhou Chongguang, annoying Zhou Chongguang. When they returned to the hotel, the receptionist said gently, Miss Tang, Miss Qin has been waiting for you for over an hour. Cher looked a little disheveled. Her eyes were a little swollen and her nose was red. Hearing the receptionist's words, she looked up in confusion. Then she saw Qin Mu. Chapter 2152. With just one glance, Cher felt that Qin Mu knew how to take care of herself. At least, Qin Mu was a woman who was ready to get divorced, which was much better than her current situation. She didn't want to be a joke, and she thought that Qin Mu also had something to say to her, so Cher smiled lightly. Let's talk in my room. Qin Mu nodded, got up, and walked to Cher. Before Cher could react, Qin Mu had already reached out and hugged her a little tightly. There was a touch of uncontrollable emotion in that strength. You're back. Qin Mu buried her face in Cher's neck and murmured, It's been so many years. How have you been? Cher's body stiffened, and she didn't say anything. Just as Qin Mu said, so many years had passed, and everything had changed. Facing Qin Mu, Cher felt a little unfamiliar. As if feeling her resistance, Qin Mu closed her eyes slightly, but still pretended to be relaxed and let go of her. Let's talk in the room. Cher looked at her silently and walked into the elevator first. Qin Mu immediately followed. As soon as the elevator closed, the dignified Qin Mu disappeared, and she hugged Cher like a little wolf dog and didn't let go. Qin Mu, Cher said in a low voice, you weren't so clingy when you were 14. You weren't so cold to me when I was 14. Qin Mu pouted and directly turned into a 14-year-old child. clinging to Cher. Cher couldn't do anything, and she couldn't push her away, so she could only let her hug her. However, she kept a straight face. It wasn't that she hated Qin Mu, but she didn't know how to get close to Qin Mu. If she got too close, she would definitely get close to Yi Muyun. This was what she didn't want, and it was probably Qin Mu's purpose. Qin Mu's thoughts were easy to understand. She wanted to divorce Zhou Chongguang, so she felt that she should be with Yi Muyun now. It was impossible. Cher opened the door and walked in first. She asked Qin Mu softly, "Have you eaten?" Qin Mu shook her head. "Not yet." Cher took off her coat. "I'll order a meal first. I'm a little hungry now, so I might not be in the mood to talk." Qin Mu pursed her lips and did not dare to object. Cher must have known why she was here. However, Cher's expression was very ugly. Did something happen? Just as Qin Mu was in a daze, Cher ordered 2 Western-style dishes and washed her face. When she returned to the living room, there was a knock on the door. She opened the door and the waiter pushed the food cart in. Seeing that Qin Mu was there, he left quickly. "Eat first," Cher said softly before sitting down. She was wearing a Chanel dress. It was retro and elegant, a little different from before. Qin Mu looked at her fixedly, not eating for a long time. "If you've eaten, then don't force yourself," Cher said softly. Qin Mu put down her fork immediately. "I've eaten." Cher looked at her and did not say anything else. She just continued eating. She ate quickly and elegantly, finishing her lunch in 10 minutes. Qin Mu was a little stunned. Cher was not like this in the past. She was always picky about food and would only eat properly if her brother forced her to. Perhaps sensing Qin Mu's gaze, Cher wiped her lips and smiled. People change. Without someone to rely on, they have to grow up on their own. Chapter 2153. She looked at Qin Mu and went straight to the point. "Qin Mu, whether you're doing well or not doesn't have much to do with your brother and I," she said in a low voice. "After you and Zhou Chongguang got married, I could totally come back, but I didn't." Qin Mu looked a little lost in thought. Cher revealed a bitter smile. "Sometimes when you walk out, you can't come back. When I left, I thought I could come back. But when I walked out, I realized that I couldn't. It's not because of you or Zhou Chongguang. It's because something happens every day." Cher said everything in one breath. Qin Mu was stunned. "Cher, what happened to you?" Cher lowered her eyes and said in a low voice after a while, "I'm sorry. I don't want to talk about it." Qin Mu's eyes were blurred and she didn't know what to do. She had a feeling that this story had something to do with her brother. Her heart was beating wildly. She used all her strength to ask, "Do you still like him?" What responded to her was a long period of silence. After a long time, Cher replied, "Some things are more important than liking someone." Qin Mu was stunned. Did Shui find someone more important than her brother, or did something happen to her? She couldn't say much. In fact, she shouldn't have come today. She had come here shamelessly. She would have been snubbed in the future, but Cher didn't. She was so friendly and calm that it made her want to cry. "I don't know what to say. I think you should be the one saying those words to you," Qin Mu said in a low voice. "But I'm sorry." Qin Mu didn't cry. She just smiled bitterly. She laughed at her ignorance and at her helplessness, but no matter how sorry she was, she couldn't exchange for her brother's happiness. Cher's expression was very calm. "Qin Mu, just be good in the future." There were too many words between them, but they couldn't say them out loud. In the end, Qin Mu still left. When she left, she seemed to be in a daze. She had a feeling that Cher had really given up on her brother. It wasn't because of Song Karen's existence, but because she didn't want to be with him anymore. On the way back, Qin Mu sat in the car and listened to the music in the car, quietly spacing out. She recalled a lot of things, not her past with Zhou Chongguang, but her brother and Cher's past. Those childhood sweethearts, all vanished into thin air because of her existence. When Qin Mu returned to Wenhua Hotel, her face was cold and full of tears. As soon as she got out of the car, she received a call from Zhou Chongguang. She stood in the atrium of the hotel, listening to Zhou Chongguang's voice. Qin Mu, do you have time? I want to see you. Qin Mu paused for a moment and then said, if it's a divorce, I'm free at any time. There was a moment of silence on the other end. I just want to show you something. Qin Mu didn't say a word. Zhou Chongguang said, I promise I won't do anything, and I won't force you. Okay, where are you? Qin Mu said, her voice a little hoarse. Zhou Chongguang paused for a moment and said, I'll get someone to pick you up. Qin Mu didn't reject him. I'm at Wenhua Hotel. Less than 10 minutes after she hung up, the car arrived. She understood that Zhou Chongguang was very clear about her whereabouts, and he probably knew about her meeting with Cher. So the reason why he asked her to go was most likely related to Cher. Qin Mu got into the car. Less than half an hour later, the car stopped. Chapter 2154. 2 days ago, she put the house up for sale, and later said that the house was sold. Now, the house was already someone else's. The driver was Zhou Chongguang's man, and he said congratulatively, Madam, Mr. Zhou is waiting inside. Qin Mu opened the door and got out of the car. The moment she got out of the car, the water in the little angel fountain in the villa's garden was all turned on. The water splashed under the sun, and the little angel was singing happily. At this time, Qin Mu found that the sun had come out, and the sky was blue. It was even a little hot, and the temperature was a little high. She slowly walked up the stairs, walking in the place that she was most familiar with, and also the place that hurt the most. This was the place where she and Zhou Chongguang got married on their wedding night. This was the place where she first heard that he had a relationship with Gu Mei. She stayed here night after night, and later saw in the small newspaper that he lingered in the boudoir of a small star. The memory of this house was so deep that she didn't want to live here anymore. In her heart, she vaguely guessed something, and she just needed to confirm it later. Qin Mu walked in. The large hall was the same as before, and even cleaner and brighter than when she was here. In the high hall, there was a sunflower that she had loved for a long time. The things that she had asked the servants to throw away were all put back in their original places. There was even a single photo of her in her wedding photo on the small table, arranged with a crystal photo frame. Everything looked as if they were still living together. And the man who directed the magic, a young man in home clothes, sat in front of the piano in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, playing an elegant tune with his slender fingers. At this time, his side profile was gentle, and the sun shone on his face, washing away the philistinism left by many years in the business world. His entire facial features were flushed like water. He was very focused, and his eyes were always looking at the piano score. This was the scene that Qin Mu had been longing to see after their marriage. But in the 4 years of marriage, he had not touched the piano even once, except for cleaning by the servants. After a long time, she probably understood in her heart. Qin Mu stood still and didn't run away like last time. Her voice was hoarse. Zhou Chongguang, what do you mean? The sound of the piano stopped. He gently closed the lid, turned sideways, and looked at her quietly. I bought this place. Qin Mu didn't say anything. He bought this place, but it didn't mean anything. I've tried to find all the original things. There's only one thing left. His eyes were burning. Mu, you're the only one left here. Qin Mu smiled faintly. Gu Mei or Lin Shui, the woman behind Xiao Zhou, you can just pick any one of them to move in. He looked at her and said calmly, Gu Mei has been sent to a branch abroad. Lin Shui, I gave her a check of 10 million yuan. Qin Mu chuckled lightly. Zhou Chongguang, not every prodigal son has a devoted woman who is willing to wait for him. Lin Shui, Tang Xingzhou Chongguang held his chin and looked at her quietly. After a while he smiled. Qin Mu, you're in a hurry to divorce me. Isn't it because of Tang Cher? Qin Mu's face changed slightly. Because she's back, you can't wait to divorce so that your good brother can be together. Zhou Chongguang said softly, let me tell you, they're unlikely. Chapter 2155. Qin Mu suddenly exploded. He picked up something beside him and threw it at Zhou Chongguang. Bang! It landed beside Zhou Chongguang. That's great. You can still chase after Cher after we get divorced. After playing with so many doubles, isn't President Zhou sick of it? Qin Mu seemed to have gotten angry out of nowhere. As he spoke, he threw things at him. Save your affectionate face for someone else. I won't fall for it. Qin Mu finally threw a crystal photo of herself at him. This time, Zhou Chongguang didn't dodge and was hit on the forehead. Over there, a patch of green and purple had been smashed out. Qin Mu was also stunned. Zhou Chongguang didn't care. He just reached out to touch it and smiled at her. Qin Mu, you're cute when you're jealous. Who's jealous? Qin Mu glared at him angrily and then walked out. You can live here if you like. You can bring whoever you want back. Anyway, you've bought it. However, Zhou Chongguang had already taken her hand and said in a low voice, we're still husband and wife. Everything I have is our joint property. Mumu, this is still your home. He didn't use much strength to hold her, as if he was afraid of hurting her. Qin Mu struggled a little, and he tightened his grip again, just to make sure that he didn't hurt her. Mumu, I used to mess around, but you should have told me earlier. Zhou Chongguang sighed. Forgive me once, okay? His words were so nice that Qin Mu was in a trance. Forgive me once. Then who would forgive her? Then what were those difficult nights she had gone through? Zhou Chongguang, you don't love me, but you use me. She chuckled. Or do you want to have a lighter taste after you've been with so many women? Zhou Chongguang was just holding her hand, but now he slid it down her arm to her shoulder and pressed it gently. This time, I'm serious. Okay. Qin Mu said calmly, fire Gu Mei. I want half of your shares in glory. Zhou Chongguang frowned. You know that Gu Mei has been in prison for me for several years, and the family won't agree with me. Qin Mu just smiled lightly. Zhou Chongguang, I was almost moved just now. I thought I was very important to you, but it turns out that I'm just SOSO. Zhou Chongguang narrowed his eyes. Mumu, don't mess around. I'm not fooling around. Qin Mu said very seriously, Zhou Chongguang, what I want is wholeheartedly, what I want is everything. And you can't give it to me. Don't pretend that you can give me the whole world. You can't give it to anyone, because your world is not complete. After saying that, Qin Mu struggled to get rid of him. That's it. Goodbye. Zhou Chongguang pursed his lips and didn't say anything. He watched her walk out. After she left, he leaned against the back of the sofa, took out a cigarette, and lit it quietly. Qin Mu was different from before. She was no longer his shy little wife. She couldn't wait to soar high, and how could he let go? She had become a habit of his side. Without her, he felt empty. When he saw Tang Cher, his heart was palpitating, and even his heart was moved. But when it came to life, he still felt that it was more natural to keep Qin Mu by his side. Chapter 2156. But what could he do? She seemed to be determined to leave him. Zhou Chongguang smiled gently. His smile was a little deep, making it hard to tell what he was really thinking. Just then his phone rang. He looked down and saw that it was a call from Gu Mei. He paused for a moment, but still picked it up. Gu Mei's low voice came from the other end. Chongguang, I want to see you. Zhou Chongguang pursed his thin lips. Gu Mei, you know why I asked you to leave, right? Gu Mei was silent for a while before she said softly, isn't it easier to fire me? If you want. His answer was very cold and heartless. Gu Mei sobbed softly, and after a long time, she said softly, I just want to see you. Zhou Chongguang thought for a moment and said slowly, Gu Mei, I won't sleep with you. Gu Mei seemed to be laughing at herself. Of course. Zhou Chongguang put away the phone and walked out of the villa. He had been very unfair to Gu Mei from the beginning. When she was in prison, he was with Qin Mu and did not visit her even once. She came out of prison and became his secretary. On the night she was inaugurated, they had sex. It was not Gu Mei's first time, and neither was he. He had long been numb to the affairs between men and women because of the things he did in the business world. After sleeping with her that day, he leaned on the bed and smoked, feeling that he had completed a mission. It was to repay her. A year before he married Qin Mu, he and Gu Mei had been together. Of course, they did not have sex often. Because he had too many social engagements, Gu Mei was often not in line. After he got married, he had some small celebrities, and his relationship with Gu Mei became even more shallow. They became more and more like a boss and a female secretary, until Gu Mei could not stand it anymore. Zhou Chongguang was very clear that the reason why Qin Mu knew so much about him was because of Gu Mei. But he could not blame Gu Mei. In his heart, he felt guilty to Gu Mei. He could not blame a woman who had given herself completely to him. Sometimes he also found it strange. Qin Mu was clearly an even more innocent girl than Gu Mei, so why could he be so ruthless towards Qin Mu? He thought that because she was Yi Muyun's younger sister, he couldn't let go of her whenever he faced her. Especially when they were on the bed, looking at that little face that was as beautiful as a painting, he couldn't control his mind and couldn't help but become rough. She cried out in pain. Later on, she became afraid of him. There was a period of time when his relationship with Qin Mu was not harmonious, probably because of his psychological effects. Zhou Chongguang got into his car and drove to the place Gu Mei had mentioned. It was a private room in a club. When he pushed the door open, Gu Mei was already singing karaoke on the sofa with 2 bottles of wine in front of her. She looked up at Zhou Chongguang and smiled. "Did you go to see Qin Mu?" "You know I don't like people asking about my personal affairs." Zhou Chongguang's voice was very calm. Then he sat down next to her. Gu Mei continued to sing Shui Zhiqian's Romance. She sang it quite well. Zhou Chongguang tilted his head and looked at her, his gaze a little indifferent. Gu Mei's position in his heart was different from that of Lin Shui and the other small celebrities. She was the person who had accompanied him through the lowest point. She had even sacrificed herself when he was expanding his business. It was not kind of him to banish her now. Chapter 2157. When Qin Mu mentioned firing Gu Mei, he didn't agree immediately. He didn't have feelings for Gu Mei, but he owed her. After Gu Mei finished singing, her eyes were bright. She leaned her head on Zhou Chongguang's shoulder and said softly, "Chongguang, I don't want to leave." Zhou Chongguang sat there without moving, his eyes fixed on the big screen. After a long time, he lowered his head and looked at the woman on his shoulder. "Gu Mei, find a good man and marry him. I'm not your Mr. Right, I can't marry you." It would never be possible for him and Gu Mei. Even without Qin Mu, she was still Gu Zei's sister. Zhou Chongguang didn't trust anyone anymore. Back then, she could betray Yi Muyun for him, and she might betray him in the future. Gu Mei was his business partner, but she was never his wife. The women outside were alluring, but they were just playthings. A person like Qin Mu would be perfect at home. After Zhou Chongguang said that, Gu Mei was a little dazed. She asked softly, "Did Qin Mu suggest it?" For some reason, Zhou Chongguang spoke for Qin Mu. "No. She doesn't have that kind of intention, she just wants to leave me." "Gu Mei, I've let you down now, I can make it up to you." Gu Mei was still dazed and didn't speak for a long time. "Glory's 10%, let's break up completely." Zhou Chongguang smiled bitterly. To Gu Mei, he could promise these things, but to Qin Mu, he would never talk about money. Because she was his wife, he didn't want to use money to save their marriage. Actually, he knew that if Qin Mu wasn't willing, he wouldn't be able to exchange everything for Qin Mu. Gu Mei blinked, and her makeup was a little messy. Her voice was a little shaky. "Chongguang? Gu Mei, if I fell in love with you all these years, I think I would do anything." Zhou Chongguang forced a smile and touched her long hair. "I still can't make up my mind. If this went on, it would be unfair to her." He didn't want to be fair, but the only one who was left was Qin Mu. It didn't matter if he was sorry or if he was a jerk, because she was his wife, she should accept it. Gu Mei's lips trembled. She stared at him for a long time and then chuckled. "So you're willing to come because you want to completely break off with me." She held the glass with her fingers and drank the whole glass. After drinking, she looked at him. "Can you get drunk with me once?" Zhou Chongguang looked at her quietly and didn't make a sound. He just reached out for another cup on the table. After drinking 2 bottles of hard liquor, he faintly felt that something was wrong. His body was very hot, and there was something breaking out of the cocoon. It was a thirst that needed to be vented. Entangled, eager embrace. Messy, Their breathing was disordered, and the room was filled with decadence. This was the most primitive impulse between men and women. 2 hours later, Zhou Chengguang slowly woke up. He was lying on the sofa, and Gu Mei was lying on his chest, hugging him with her slender arms. The light was dim, and such a scene would make people feel confused. They were in love. Zhou Chengguang moved his body slowly and looked down at the woman in his arms. The last time he and Gu Mei did it was about half a year ago. He had never had any urges towards her body. She must have put something in the wine. What's the point? He sighed softly, sat up, and gently pushed her to the side. Chapter 2158. Zhou Chengguang had already started to put on his clothes. He said calmly, "I didn't take any protection just now. Remember to take your medicine later." Gu Mei was still sitting on the sofa. Her eyes looked hurt in the dark, but he couldn't see it. Actually, he had never seen her hurt. From the first time he saw her climb into a client's bed and use tricks to get a big order, she knew that he would never fall in love with her in this life. But she still couldn't bear to leave him. Just like just now, the 10% of glory was such a tempting offer. If she was smart, she would have agreed to it instead of doing something to make him angry. They did it, but she could tell that he didn't enjoy it. He was a little angry and wanted her to take her medicine. Every time they did it, she would obediently take her medicine. She didn't dare to have a child, because that would make him angry. She always foolishly thought that he didn't love Qin Mu and that they would divorce one day. She foolishly guarded him, not daring to do anything to make him unhappy. They snuggled up to each other and became demons together. Qin Mu, on the other hand, was still clean. Now that Qin Mu thought he was dirty, he wanted to be clean. But could he be clean? And Chengguang, is it really like what you said? You don't love Qin Mu at all? If you don't love Qin Mu, why did you spend so much effort to buy the villa and personally go to the garbage dump to pick up the things that Qin Mu threw away one by one? Gu Mei laughed softly, and tears rolled down her cheeks. It turned out that it wasn't that she didn't love him enough, and it wasn't that she didn't work hard enough. It was that no matter how dirty a man did, the white moon in his heart would always be clean. In the parking lot of the club, Zhou Chengguang sat in the car and smoked. It wasn't his original intention to have sex with Gu Mei, but he didn't feel too guilty. After all, he had cheated many times after marriage. He really didn't lack this one. And now that he and Qin Mu were in conflict, it wasn't strange for him to have a woman. Before starting the car, he called Gu Mei again and said, "Don't delay the flight tomorrow." On the other side, Gu Mei didn't say anything. She just stared blankly. After a long time, he hung up the phone, started the car, and drove back to the villa. He took a shower and lay on the bed that he and Qin Mu had slept on countless times. When he closed his eyes, Qin Mu's bland and beautiful face would appear in his mind. So shy, he had clearly done it with Gu Mei 3 times, but at this time, he was still interested in his wife. Zhou Chengguang felt that he was a little crazy. He lay wondering how he could win her back. It seemed difficult but not impossible. He knew that the only person she saw frequently was Zhao Yan. She liked to go to that restaurant to eat and listen to Zhao Yan play music. Zhou Chengguang sneered. Later, Qin Mu found that whenever she appeared in Zhao Yan's restaurant, Zhou Chengguang would always appear. This made Qin Mu very annoyed, and Zhao Yan could naturally see that Zhou Chengguang wanted to get back his wife. As an outsider, of course, he couldn't say too much. Sometimes, Zhou Chengguang would go up and play a few songs. After a long time, his skills came back. As Zhao Yan listened, his expression became a little thought-provoking. From Zhou Chengguang's song, he could hear the emotions. Chapter 2159. But now, Zhou Chengguang, who had been neglected for so many years, was much better than before. How could Zhao Yan not be surprised? When Qin Mu went to the bathroom, Zhao Yan asked, "Don't you plan to return to this circle? Your talent shouldn't be buried." Zhou Chengguang smiled and held the goblet with his slender fingers. "It's just a pastime for me now." Zhao Yan thought, "Picking up girls? It seems that only girls like Qin Mu like this. Other women prefer money, Zhou Chongguang said calmly. Zhao Yan stared at him and asked, "What about now?" Zhou Chongguang paused and said seriously, "There is no one else. Gu Mei was just an accident." Zhao Yan smiled and didn't say anything. After all, it was a matter between husband and wife, and he didn't want to interfere too much. But he thought of something. What about Cher? As Cher's uncle, Zhao Yan was qualified to make things difficult for Zhou Chongguang. Zhao Yan grew up with Yi Muyun and Cher, and he had seen them break up because of Zhou Chongguang, so Zhao Yan didn't have a good impression of Zhou Chongguang, not to mention that Zhou Zong had a lot of affairs in the past few years. It wasn't strange at all that Qin Mu wanted a divorce. Zhao Yan saw Qin Mu coming back from the bathroom, so he got up and left without saying anything. Qin Mu looked at Zhou Chongguang and said, "Zhou Chongguang, what do you want?" Zhou Chongguang smiled and said, "I have something to talk to you about." Qin Mu looked at him. "It's about your brother and Tang Cher." Zhou Chongguang's expression was a bit unpredictable. "I think you will be interested." He knew the little girl's thoughts, so he could easily control her. Sure enough, Qin Mu did not reject him immediately. She stared into his eyes. "These days, because you asked for a divorce, your brother didn't let go of the glory." Zhou Chongguang smiled faintly. "So do you think I can bear to divorce you?" Qin Mu's expression became extremely ugly as she scolded in a low voice, "You're despicable. Let's find a quiet place to talk." He suggested that this was an elegant restaurant, and what he wanted to do to her was not elegant at all. This was not a good place. Qin Mu stared at him for a long time. "Don't you want your brother and sister-in-law to get back together?" Zhou Chongguang smiled deeply and even reached out to pinch her little face. "Thinking about it, this should be what you want the most, right?" Qin Mu said softly, "Zhou Chongguang, you overestimate me. I'm the most selfish person. How can I sacrifice myself for others?" "Really?" Zhou Chongguang chuckled, "So you're even giving up this only chance?" Qin Mu pursed her lips and didn't say anything. He stood up. "Let's talk in my car." Qin Mu was an innocent girl, and she was tempted by him. She thought about it and agreed. She stood up and walked out to the parking lot. Zhou Chongguang drove a Land Rover Aurora today. He stood beside the car, looking more energetic and youthful. Qin Mu walked over slowly. "Let's talk here." As soon as she finished speaking, Zhou Chongguang had already opened the car door and pushed her in. "Zhou Chongguang, what are you doing?" She pushed him with her hand, but he had already locked the car door. Chapter 2160. It was dark in the car. The sound of any breathing was magnified countless times, and it sounded a little warm. Qin Mu's eyes were especially clear in the darkness. They were clean and clear. Zhou Chongguang's voice was a little hoarse. "Mumu, I want to kiss you." As he spoke, his slender fingers had already pinched her sharp chin and fixed her in place. Qin Mu's body moved a little, but her little head couldn't move at all. She could only look at him and say angrily, "Zhou Chongguang, you're shameless. It's not against the law to kiss your wife." His voice was sexy and hoarse. "Maybe you can scream and sue me. Let's see if the police will interfere with a couple's sex." If it wasn't for the darkness, he could see that her little face was so red that it was about to bleed. However, he could still feel that her face was very hot. He knew her well. At this time, she must be ashamed and angry. Qin Mu was the most orthodox kind of girl, the very serious kind. Usually, she rarely took the initiative to do things between husband and wife with him. Sometimes, he wondered if she was cold. If it weren't for the fact that she would cry softly every time he went too far, he would have thought that she didn't feel anything at all. At this moment, he was secretly teasing her. He couldn't help but put down his crafty plot and taste her first. So he leaned over, took her little mouth, and kissed her thoroughly. His technique was very good, and he also knew what kind of style a shy young lady liked. At first, he had the intention to seduce her, but later he himself had lost himself in the kiss, and threw himself into the kiss, thinking about how to please her and make her happy. Qin Mu began to struggle, and then she slowly lowered her little head. Her hands were entwined with his, and her little mouth naturally welcomed his existence. She hummed softly, and that soft voice was like a village medicine that stimulated him. If it weren't for the parking lot on the road, but underground, he would have taken her long ago. Zhou Chongguang kissed her for a long time. He kissed her little mouth, neck, and everything that could be kissed. After the kiss, it was already 10 minutes later. As soon as she was free, she slapped him. A clap resounded in the darkness. Instead of being annoyed, Zhou Chongguang chuckled and said, "Mumu, you obviously enjoyed it just now." She slapped him again, this time with so much force that her palm hurt. Despicable. Her breath was ragged and her legs were weak as she said it. She reached out to open the door, but he had locked it. Qin Mu was about to go crazy. "Zhou Chongguang, you bastard, open the door. Do you know what you look like now?" His voice was hoarse and hoarse. He turned on the lights in the car with one hand, and the car was instantly lit up with a warm yellow light. His fingers gently caressed her red lips. "Mumu, look at yourself." Qin Mu pursed her lips and glared at him. However, she still looked at herself through the rearview mirror. Her lips were bright red and even slightly swollen. Her eyes were glistening with tears. It was as if she had been loved. She knew that she would look like this after they had sex. No matter how reluctant she was sometimes, she would always be tortured like this in the end. "What will men think when they see you like this, huh?" He kissed the skin behind her ear and murmured, "Mumu, you never know how attractive you are." Chapter 2161. He paused for a moment. There won't be any more in the future. Gu Mei has gone abroad, and those little celebrities are no longer interesting. So, I'm fine with it. Qin Mu closed her eyes. "I don't think you're interesting either. Tell me, who's interesting?" He kissed the corner of her mouth and couldn't help kissing her again. Qin Mu didn't resist. She let him kiss her, knowing that she couldn't escape. After a long time, when he was satisfied and left, she chuckled. "Will you kill him?" "You can try." Zhou Chongguang bit her lips and said, "Mumu, be good. I like it when you're good." Qin Mu looked down. "Didn't you say that you wanted to talk about something? Tell me." Zhou Chongguang's eyes flickered. The seduction had failed. She was no longer the little girl who blushed and couldn't help herself from kissing him. She had been very proactive during their first time. On the wedding night, he was drunk, but he knew that she had kissed him in her pajamas. That night, he had possessed her with a hint of resentment, not gently. On the wedding night, she had cried a lot, and only he knew how hypocritical his consolation had been. Now, he had spent a lot of effort to seduce her, but she wasn't moved. Her reaction was just a normal physiological reaction of a woman. As a man, he knew it very well. Zhou Chongguang was a little disappointed, but he quickly adjusted himself and smiled. "I've invested in a reality show. The theme is to invite some business tycoons to participate and bring their wives. I think the ratings will be very high." Qin Mu's eyes widened. "Zhou Chongguang, you're not thinking of asking me to participate with you, are you? I'll invite Yi Muyun to participate as well. He might bring Song Karen, but Zhao Yan doesn't have a girlfriend. Tang Sher will be his best choice. There won't be any scandals, and she's eye-catching enough." Zhou Chongguang looked at her and said, "Of course, you can disagree, but I won't invite the people before me. In the end, I'll invite some celebrities." Qin Mu looked at him warily. "What are you up to? Do you think I'm that bad?" He smiled. "I'm just a man who wants to repair his relationship with his wife." She paused for a moment and said, "Or do you think your smart brother will be fooled by me?" Zhou Chongguang said frankly, "Although Glory is doing well now, it's not even a third of boys. I can't even sleep well if your brother stomps his feet. Why would I ask for trouble?" Qin Mu still pursed her lips and didn't say anything. "Take your time to think about it. I'll wait for your reply." He smiled and pinched her little face. "Are you still staying at Wenhua Hotel? Mumu, you can move back. I'll stay there." Qin Mu's face tensed up and he didn't seem to appreciate the gesture. "No need. How is it convenient to stay in a hotel?" He looked at her and said, "Besides, I'll feel sorry for you." Qin Mu said coldly, "Zhou Chongguang, don't be a hypocrite. I'm not a little girl anymore. Yes, you've been Mrs. Zhou for a long time. I knew that on our wedding night. He deliberately provoked her. Qin Mu was naturally angry because he had lied to her before. When she was 14 years old, he said that they slept together, which meant that they had sex. But on their wedding night, she was in so much pain. What did that mean? Chapter 2162. Zhou Chongwang was well aware of Qin Mu's hateful expression. No matter how much she had changed, she was still as perceptive as a young girl when it came to relationships. Qin Mu glared at him. Zhou Chongwang, you don't have to mention your despicable past anymore. It will only make me hate you more. Really? When I kissed you just now, you didn't say that. He chuckled and reached out to touch her little face. As for Qin Mu, he awkwardly turned his head to the side. At this moment, her hair was slightly messy. A strand of hair was scattered over her shoulder, making her look a little mischievous. Zhou Chongwang brushed it aside for her. His eyes fell on the side of her face, and his heart palpitated. He had always known about his wife's beauty, but he had never appreciated it like this. Her beauty was tranquil and comfortable. Send me back to the hotel. Qin Mu suddenly turned her head and looked right into his deep eyes. At that moment, Zhou Chongwang was a little embarrassed. But after being in the business world for so many years, he was used to hiding himself. He just smiled faintly and started the car. In just a short while, he sent her to Wenhua Hotel. The car stopped, but he did not let her get out immediately. Instead, he grabbed her hand and said calmly, "You said it. Think about it." Qin Mu's lips moved, but she did not say anything in the end. Zhou Chongwang let her get out of the car. He lit a cigarette and chuckled as he looked at Qin Mu, who was about to escape. Qin Mu ran back to her suite and closed the door. Her chest was still heaving up and down. Zhou Chongwang's offer was indeed very tempting to her. Her biggest wish now was for her brother to be with Cher again. If it were not for her, Cher would not have sacrificed herself. Later on, she secretly went to the US to look for Cher, but she could not find her. She knew that her brother was also searching until he gave up all hope. She even knew of Song Karen's existence, but it was probably her brother's self-deception. On one hand, he convinced himself that he had already forgotten Cher. On the other hand, he felt that if he had a girlfriend, Cher would probably dare to come back. Qin Mu held her cell phone for a long time before she picked it up and dialed Zhou Chongwang's number. Her voice was repressed and restrained. "Zhou Chongwang, I agree. But I have a condition." Before she could finish, she heard Zhou Chongwang's voice. With one hand on the steering wheel and the other holding the phone, he chuckled. "I'm not allowed to touch you, am I?" Qin Mu's silence proved that he had guessed correctly. Zhou Chongwang paused for a moment before he said slowly, "Don't worry, I won't touch you unless you want me to, okay?" Qin Mu was annoyed. "Zhou Chongwang, you're really shameless." He laughed calmly and said, "Really? You used to say that I was the sunshine of your life. Have you changed so quickly?" Qin Mu was silent for a while before she said calmly, "Zhou Chongwang, it's not that fast. 8 years is enough to change everything." This time, Zhou Chongwang could not laugh anymore. After hanging up, Qin Mu stared at her cell phone in a daze. She did not know how Zhou Chongwang would invite her brother. From what she knew, her brother still deeply hated Zhou Chongwang. Also, why would Cher participate in a show that Zhou Chongwang invested in? Chapter 2163. However, there was a small hiccup in the middle. Song Karen and Lin Shui came over as well. They were each accompanied by a B-list male celebrity. Qin Mu didn't mind it too much. She was disappointed in Zhou Chongwang anyway. She didn't have a problem with him doing whatever he wanted with Lin Shui. Lin Shui, on the other hand, felt a little guilty when she saw Qin Mu. She didn't dare to act rashly when she looked at Zhou Chongwang. "It's time for you to change your team members." Qin Mu's tone was mocking. Zhou Chongwang glared at the producer. What kind of work was this? The producer was also stunned. He was completely out of it. However, since they were already here and there were so many reporters today, It was impossible to change it. No matter what, they had to take care of their reputation. Zhao Yan and Xue Er had always been together. Zhao Yan's gaze landed on Yi Muyun. He saw that Yi Muyun's gaze was like a little wolf dog staring at Xue Er. He sighed inwardly. These two clearly have something going on, but they're not together. He had always disdained these kinds of shows. This time, he was doing it for Cher's happiness. He said in a low voice, "Song Karen came with someone else. It seems that she and Yi Muyun aren't as close as we thought." Cher glanced at him and snorted. "That has nothing to do with me." That day, the hickey on Song Karen's neck was huge. How was it possible that they weren't intimate? She hadn't seen Yi Muyun since that day. She was going to return to America immediately, but Zhao Yan asked her to take part in a show. She didn't expect to meet Yi Muyun. At that moment, she could feel two burning gazes on her. She couldn't ignore them. Hearing her say that, Zhao Yan smiled and didn't say anything. When the reporters interviewed him and asked him about his relationship with Cher, Zhao Yan hugged Cher and said generously to the camera, "And is the girl I care about the most." As he said that, he leaned over and kissed her forehead. He also felt that Yi Muyun's gaze couldn't wait to kill him. After the kiss, the scene of him kissing Cher became a trending topic. Who was ranked first? Yi Muyun narrowed his eyes and looked at Zhao Yan with a hint of jealousy. Yes, it was jealousy. If not for the fact that he was Cher's little uncle, he would have rushed up and punched Zhao Yan in the face. On the other side, Zhou Chongguang chuckled and whispered, "Look, aren't you envious that your Prince Charming is kissing someone else?" Qin Mu's gaze was indifferent. "Zhou Chongguang, you really know me well." She smiled and said, "But I seem to remember that Cher is your goddess. You don't feel uncomfortable, do you?" Although Zhou Chongguang had wanted to provoke her, he didn't expect to be ridiculed by her instead. At that moment, he felt a little uncomfortable. Their eyes met and happened to meet Gu Zhe's dark eyes. Gu Zhe didn't come because of him. It was Yi Muyun's request. Zhou Chongguang couldn't help but complain. What a pervert! Two grown men coming to participate in a reality show like this. However, this was also a big attraction. The Fujoshi in front of the TV would definitely like it. He looked at Gu Zhe with a meaningful gaze, because he could tell that Gu Zhe liked Qin Mu. He would never have a good impression of a man who liked his wife. However, Gu Zhe was Gu Mei's brother. Chapter 2164. The production crew rented a bus and prepared to head to Dali, Yunnan. Before they left, they took away all the cash and cards they had on them. The production crew gave out some cash regularly. Including the staff, the bus was full. To the men and women who went in and out of the luxury car all day long, it was especially crowded and uncomfortable. Gu Zhe and Yi Muyun were inseparable, sitting together. In front of them were Cher and Zhao Yan, while beside them were Song Karen and a male celebrity. Zhou Chongguang and Qin Mu sat at the back. Moreover, Zhou Chongguang sent that stupid woman, Lin Shui, to the front. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. He looked at the calm Qin Mu and smiled. "You don't seem nervous. I remember telling you that every crew has a suite every night." Qin Mu was still unmoved. Didn't Zhou Zong find a woman to warm his bed? "I don't have the habit of going out at night." His voice also became indifferent. "Moreover, I want to be a good man now." Qin Mu ignored him. Zhou Chongguang didn't say anything either. The relationship between the husband and wife wasn't very harmonious. The drive from B City to Dali was a full 20 hours. They didn't find a place to rest in between and slept in the bus at night. This was a huge torture for everyone. The production crew explained that this was the first test. They wanted to see if the male partner could coax and take care of the female partner. Gu Zhe looked at Yi Muyun and coughed lightly. "Am I coaxing you or are you coaxing me?" Yi Muyun pursed his lips and glared at him. Gu Zhe touched his nose. "All right." The bus continued to drive. Outside the window, it gradually became dark. Everyone only ate some bread and then went to sleep. "This show is too inhumane. They don't even allow us to use our phones." Zhou Chongguang's former mistress, Lin Shui, complained. However, no one said anything after she said that. She was a little bored and didn't say anything else. Lin Shui was not an idiot. When she saw Tang share, she knew that she had become a substitute. So, Zhou Zong liked the ANN. So this reality show was organized for the ANN? Lin Shui was full of herself. In her heart, she was determined to beat NN. Since he couldn't compete in face, he would compete in figure. With this thought in mind, Lin Shui pulled down her collar. However, she immediately felt that it was very cold, so she quickly pulled it up again. The car was quiet, the lights outside were bright, but the interior of the car was dim and flickering. It was especially quiet. Since they were sleeping in a sitting position, no one was comfortable. Cher tried to adjust her position countless times, but it was still uncomfortable. Especially her head. She felt uncomfortable no matter where she placed it. In the end, she gave up and leaned against the window. Yi Muyun watched her quietly from behind. His heart was filled with tenderness. Being close to her like this had been his dream for the past 8 years. Although he was still angry at her, he didn't want to think too much about it now. She was so close to him and within his reach. He kept staring at her. Naturally, he could tell that she was uncomfortable. His eyes were filled with heartache. She had been spoiled by him since she was young. How could she suffer like this? Therefore, he leaned over and adjusted her back by 30 degrees so that she could lie down and sleep. However, he would be very uncomfortable if she did that. Chapter 2165. How could Gu Zhe not see that Yi Muyun did this because he felt sorry for Zhao Yan, and also because he was afraid that Zhao Yan would lend his shoulder to share? How could Mr. Yi, who was always jealous, stand that kind of intimacy? His tone was full of ridicule. How could Yi Muyun not hear it? In the dark car, his voice was very light. Gu Zhe, if you want, come closer. Gu Zhe's expression was a little thought-provoking. A man who had been forbidden for too long was indeed abnormal. He pulled his clothes and coughed. We are in the same room but not in the same bed. Yi Muyun only glanced at him and didn't say anything. And their heavy conversation was heard by all the people in the car. Those who didn't know better would really think that they were a couple. Cher sat in front of Yi Muyun. She should be lying down now. She could see him a little if she slightly lifted her eyelids. He helped her put down the seat, so she was much more comfortable lying down. But she also knew that he wouldn't be too comfortable. With a height of 1.84 meters, it must be very hard for him to bend his long legs in such a narrow place. She originally wanted to shake her head, but Zhao Yan secretly held her hand and smiled. Cher tilted her face and looked at Zhao Yan with a puzzled look. Then, Zhao Yan did something inhumane. He also put down the seat and forced Gu Zhe to have nowhere to put his legs. After putting it down flat, he and Cher lay down together, and then they held hands and fell asleep. This simply stunned everyone. Yi Muyun's face was about to darken. Gu Zhe let out a long sigh. You killed me. Yi Muyun's voice was cold. You wanted to come? He couldn't be clearer why Gu Zhe wanted to come. It was because of his baby sister, Qin Mu. Qin Mu and Zhou Chongguang came together, but it could be seen that they were still in discord. She was probably willing to come because he wanted to reconcile with Cher. Zhou Chongguang's current thoughts. Yi Muyun found that Zhou Chongguang looked at Qin Mu in a different way. It wasn't hot, but it was the way a man looked at a woman. In the past, he looked at Qin Mu at most as a child. After all, when Qin Mu followed him, she was only 14 years old. What kind of love could there be? Yi Muyun had something on his mind, and he was really uncomfortable, so he couldn't sleep for the whole night. Gu Zhe was the same. The two men each had their own thoughts. There were so many people in the car, but they were the only ones with their eyes open. There were so many people in the car, and they were the only ones who had their eyes open. Yi Muyun, the last row was empty. Zhou Chongguang was selfish, and he and Qin Mu occupied 6 seats. Qin Mu was restrained at first, and she was only willing to sleep sitting, but she had never suffered like this before. After 12 o'clock, she curled up on 2 seats and slept lightly. The night was cold, and even with a thin blanket over her, she was still shivering from the cold. Zhou Chongguang sat over and placed half of her body in his embrace. Qin Mu was still in a daze and didn't reject him. In the end, she hugged his waist and slept for the whole night. Zhou Chongguang didn't dare to move, because if he moved, she wouldn't feel safe, really. Since he was at his lowest, he had never tolerated a girl like this, nor had he been so good to anyone. He always thought that women could be bought with money. Chapter 2166. However, he couldn't buy Qin Mu, so he could only put in some effort. Wasn't she lying obediently in his arms now? At 2:00 in the morning, the chauffeur drove the car to the rest stop. He needed to go to the toilet and drink some water. There would be a short 10-minute break. Gu Zhe and Yi Muyun looked at each other and decided to get out of the car to relax. Just as he got up, Gu Zhe's gaze fell on the last row. He saw Qin Mu hugging Zhou Chongguang and sleeping peacefully in his arms. Zhou Chongguang lowered his eyes and looked at his wife quietly. If he hadn't known about their past, Gu Zhe would have thought that they were a loving couple. He looked at them and felt bitter. He stopped looking at them and got out of the car with Yi Muyun. The two of them each had a cigarette and lit it in the late autumn night. The scarlet-red dots rose and fell. Yi Muyun smiled. "Why did you come here?" They had been observing Zhou Chongguang's methods for the past few years, so it wasn't like they didn't know about it. Most of them walked some crooked paths, but they were really useful. For example, when it came to dealing with women, Zhou Chongguang was more of a jerk than any of them. However, after playing outside for a while, he used some tricks to make Qin Mu come out with him obediently. At the same time, Zhou Chongguang gave Yi Muyun, the biggest opponent, a big carrot, so that he couldn't object even if he wanted to. Gu Zhe smiled bitterly and said, "I'm the same as you. I can't control myself." Yi Muyun sighed and said, "Gu Zhe, if Qin Mu still insists on being with Zhou Chongguang, I won't object." Firstly, because of Qin Mu's illness, he wanted her to do whatever she wanted. Secondly, he really saw the change in Zhou Chongguang. It was a good start that he was willing to put in so much effort for a woman. Of course, he still hated Zhou Chongguang. If he had the chance, he still wanted to kill him. Gu Zhe paused for a moment, then took a long drag on his cigarette. "I just want her to live a good life." "Qin Mu isn't an idiot," Yi Muyun said softly. She should have noticed it a long time ago. From the bottom of his heart, Yi Muyun also didn't want Gu Zhe to hang on to Qin Mu. He didn't think highly of it, nor did he agree. Gu Zhe just smoked hard and didn't say anything. The two men looked at the white skyline in the darkness. After smoking 2 cigarettes, they followed the driver into the car. Those who should be sleeping were all sleeping, and those who couldn't sleep still couldn't sleep. After they sat down, Cher was awake, or rather, she didn't sleep at all. She couldn't sleep beside Yi Muyun. That feeling was like there was a thorn beside her, and there was a sharp pain at any time. She turned her little face to the direction of the window and looked at the boundless night. She thought of what Song Karen said to her shyly before they got into the car, and Muyun said that he wanted to switch with Gu Zhe during the evening party. "He'll be sharing a room with me." There was a glint in the corner of Cher's eyes. Since he and Song Karen were in love, why would he do such a considerate thing to her? If it wasn't for Zhao Yan's public image, she would have turned around and left. She especially didn't want to see Song Karen's delicate and timid look. That smile was very glaring. As she thought about it, her hand tightened. She heard Zhao Yan's low laugh. "Don't waste such a good seat." Snow grunted in acknowledgement, then lay down on her side. Chapter 2167. Snow grunted in acknowledgement, then lay down on her side. Zhao Yan also turned around and hugged her waist from behind. The two of them were covered with a blanket, just like a normal young couple. Late at night, the staff of the program team suddenly opened their eyes like copper bells. They gently set up the camera and took pictures of the couples sleeping one by one. Zhou Chongguang and Qin Mu's team was quite aesthetically pleasing, but Zhao Yan and Shuang Er's team was more romantic. Everything else was still passable. Only Gu Zhe and Yi Muyun, these two men, were glaring at the camera in the dark with unfriendly expressions. These clips would be posted on the official Weibo in real time. Zhao Yan and En, once again, became the second most searched topic. The first was Gu Zhe and Yi Muyun, because their expressions were There were 74 million likes under that Weibo post. Of the 230,000 comments, half of them were asking for Gu Zhe and Yi Muyun to really be together. Previously, when Mr. Ye's girlfriend, Song Karen, was rumored to have been instantly destroyed, the onlookers didn't seem to think highly of them. Although they were traveling together, they didn't feel like a CP at all. Instead, they felt that Gu Zhe and Yi Muyun were both very good-looking and had a sense of beauty. Also, the scene of them smoking together in the middle of the night was even more beautiful than the international blockbuster of Hu and Hua. Just like that, Yi Muyun and Gu Zhe, these two business elites, were famous beyond reason. The bus arrived at Dali, Yunnan, and they checked into the Shangri-La Hotel. The program team also followed the original plan and arranged a suite for each couple. But when everyone went in, they found that there was only one bed. Gu Zhe, Mr. Yi, you're a high-ranking official. You can sleep on the bed, and I'll sleep on the sofa. Zhao Yan, my dear Cher, why don't you and little uncle sleep together? Song Karen, I don't sleep on the sofa. Lin Shui, 1 million, I'll sleep with you tonight. Qin Mu, Zhou Chongguang, what kind of show is this? Can't you afford 2 beds? Zhou Chongguang was packing his things because Qin Mu was not good at this kind of thing. She was very gentle, but she was really a rich young lady. After coming out, she only cared about lying by the window and looking at the scenery. He was the one who packed the luggage. Hearing her words, he winked and smiled. I've said it before. Unless you want it, I won't force you. Qin Mu made up her mind. You sleep on the sofa? Zhou Chongguang had no objections. But if you sleep next to me, don't say that I'm shameless. Qin Mu snorted and ignored him. There was a deep meaning in his gaze. Qin Mu did not know that she actually had a nocturnal ability. She would sometimes run around at night. She would find the hottest thing and hug it to sleep. They had been married for several years, so he knew this little problem very well. Because she would not leave the room, he did not have the intention to tell her. He paused for a moment. Let me tell you something else. Every night at midnight, the production team will carry the camera into the room to film. Qin Mu exploded. What a pervert! What if someone is doing that kind of thing? His gaze suddenly became deep. Qin Mu, other than us, who else do you think has the possibility of doing this? Qin Mu was even more infuriated, and he threw something over. At that moment, the door to the room opened, and the camera pointed at them. Chapter 2168. Qin Mu struggled desperately. She resisted with all her might and whispered that she didn't want it. However, Zhou Chongguang hugged her tightly and pressed his thin lips against hers again and again. Qin Mu pursed his lips, not letting him have his way. His eyes were wide open as he stared at him. However, Zhou Chongguang's expression was quite intoxicated. He kissed her lips and said in a seductive voice, "Close your eyes. I'm filming." Qin Mu's eyes widened and her voice was muffled. Zhou Chongguang, I told you that I won't cooperate with your shameless request. With that, she wanted to push him. Zhou Chongguang hugged her forcefully and held her waist. He chuckled and said, "You said that you wouldn't go to bed with me, but you didn't say that you wouldn't kiss me." Qin Mu glared at him and reached out to slap him. Zhou Chongguang raised his hand and gestured for them to turn off the camera. He was the boss behind the scenes, so the staff naturally listened to him. Thus, they quickly turned off the camera and left. When the door closed, Zhou Chongguang's handsome face was immediately slapped. Qin Mu's breathing was slightly chaotic. She raised her head and glared at him. If there's a next time, her little hand was caught. Zhou Chongguang chuckled and said, "You still want to slap me?" He held her little hand and rubbed it gently. Her little hand was particularly soft and her fingers were slender and smooth. She had never done housework before. Qin Mu struggled, but she couldn't break free. Mu, if I kiss you again now?" He lowered his head and slowly approached her. Qin Mu used her free hand to slap him, but he stopped her in the middle. Both of her hands were gripped by his. Zhou Chongguang, what do you want to do? Qin Mu struggled with all her might, but she couldn't break free. She could only stare at him. Zhou Chongguang pressed his lips against hers and whispered, Qin Mu, I just don't want others to see me forcing you. As he spoke, he chuckled softly. As for what I want to do, his voice became softer. I want to make love. As he spoke, he picked her up and threw her onto the pure white bed. Qin Mu struggled to get up, but he immediately turned her over and stuck close to her. Zhou Chongguang. Qin Mu bit her lip and turned her face away. Get up. His gaze was dark as he stared at her little face. After a long time, he said in a hoarse voice, Kiss me and I'll let you go. She turned and glared at him. Or I'll kiss you. Zhou Chongguang lowered his head and kissed her lips. His movements were very gentle and forceful as he pried open her. She struggled, so he pinned her firmly and kissed her fiercely. It was as if a gust of wind had passed through. When he let go of her, she was already on the verge of death. Qin Mu lay down and didn't move at all. He didn't want her, but the way he kissed her made her feel ashamed. Zhou Chongguang slowly got up, knelt on both sides of her body, and gazed at her. Her long hair was spread on the side of the pillow, and her black hair was wrapped around the white pillow. Her features were clean. Zhou Chongguang looked at her and felt warm in his heart. He lowered his head and kissed her face, whispering without any emotion, Mumu, let's be together, shall we? As he spoke, he propped up his body slightly and looked at his little wife. Qin Mu was very young. She married him at the age of 18. She had been Mrs. Zhou for 4 years, but she was only 22 years old now. At her age, many girls hadn't started to fall in love yet, but she had already experienced a lot. Chapter 2169. He couldn't help kissing her again. As he kissed her, he whispered, Mumu, I won't bully you in the future. Be good and don't mention the divorce, okay? Qin Mu let him kiss her because she knew that she couldn't avoid it. If she resisted, he would probably lose his last bit of rationality. Zhou Chongguang kissed her for a long time. Mumuha. Qin Mu closed her eyes and smiled. Zhou Chongguang, I'm not a cat or dog, and I won't go with you just because you give me a bone. She opened her eyes. I know your goal. It's nothing more than to make me Mrs. Zhou, who won't fight or quarrel. And how many days can you be loyal to me? She chuckled again. Actually, you're wrong. It's not about whether you're loyal or not, but I don't love you anymore. So, he didn't need to show his loyalty to her. Zhou Chongguang's expression was a little ugly. He kept looking at Qin Mu and said slowly, Qin Mu, I can have you now. But what about after that? Tie me to the bed? Qin Mu sneered. Zhou Chongguang, don't do such a tasteless thing. I'll look down on you. The veins on his forehead were popping out. They had been together for 8 years, and she had never spoken to him like this. To be honest, he felt very uncomfortable. She used to be such a docile little girl. No matter what he said, she would hold her chin and look at him with admiration in her eyes. Her eyes seemed to be full of little stars. Zhou Chongguang pursed his thin lips and sneered. I only need to have you. Her eyes narrowed and she stared at him, afraid that he would do something. However, Zhou Chongguang still didn't do anything. After a moment, he left the bed, and even the room. In the evening, the sky was full of colorful clouds. The hotel was built by the sea. As soon as they walked out of the hotel, they could see the entire sea. Zhou Chongguang stood there in a white t-shirt and black beach pants. Lin Shui smiled and walked over. She placed her slender arm on Zhou Chongguang's shoulder and whispered, Zhou Zong, why did Mrs. Zhou kick you out? Zhou Chongguang tilted his head and glanced at the seductive woman. He didn't say anything and continued to blow out a smoke ring. Seeing that he did not push her away, Lin Shui felt a glimmer of hope. She hugged Zhou Chongguang from behind and buried her face in his back. Chongguang, I've always liked you. It has nothing to do with your power or money. She lifted her head and tiptoed to kiss his neck. Her voice was particularly seductive. I don't care about our status. I can always be the woman behind your back. But I don't want to. Zhou Chongguang narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice. Lin Shui was stunned. She instinctively wanted to let go, but then she saw Qin Mu sitting opposite her. Zhou Chongguang was also stunned. Qin Mu had already changed her clothes. She was wearing a white floral dress. She probably came out to get some fresh air, not to look for him. But unfortunately he saw such a scene. Even when he was caught on the spot in the office last time, Zhou Chongguang had not been so flustered. He immediately pushed Lin Shui away and coughed softly. Mu, it's not what you see. It doesn't matter what it is. Qin Mu looked at Lin Shui and said, if Miss Lin needs it, I can make room for you tonight. Chapter 2170. Zhou Chongguang put the cigarette in his mouth and took a puff. He looked at Qin Mu with a frown. It's windy here. Don't stay here for too long. Did I disturb you? Qin Mu said coldly. Then she walked towards Zhao Yan and Cher's room. Zhou Chongguang stopped her. Qin Mu. She paused. Remember that you're a married woman. Isn't it inappropriate for you to go to a single man's bedroom like this? He walked slowly to her and pinched her cheek. Or is it because of what happened just now, so Mrs. Zhou wants an eye for an eye? I'm not as lame as you. Qin Mu pushed his hand away. Zhou Chongguang, don't think that everyone is as shameless as you. After that she wanted to leave, but he caught her. Zhou Chongguang frowned and stared at her eyes, but he didn't say a word. After a long time, he let go of her and smiled. Remember to come back early. He looked at his watch. It's 6 o'clock now. We'll have dinner at 7 o'clock. Qin Mu broke away from him and ignored his words. Zhou Chongguang watched her leave and smiled. She had really grown up and had a personality. She didn't listen to him anymore. He smoked the cigarette quietly and thought that he probably couldn't let her go. It wasn't because she was the best candidate for Mrs. Zhou, nor was it because he was too lazy to get a divorce. It was because Qin Mu was quite cute when she threw a tantrum. Married life seemed to be much more interesting. After they were about to get a divorce, and Qin Mu went to Zhao Yan and Cher's room just to take a look and talk to Cher. Along the way, her brother didn't seem to take the initiative. They didn't talk. Moreover, Zhou Chongguang, that bastard, arranged Song Karen's room and her brother's room next door. And the celebrity who came with Song Karen was missing Zhou Chongguang, that bastard. She knocked on the door and entered. It was Cher who opened the door. She was a little surprised to see Qin Mu. Zhao Yan, on the other hand, was adjusting a piano. He was squatting down, revealing only his back. Qin Mu looked at Cher. Can we talk? Cher smiled and looked back at Zhao Yan. I'll go out with Mumu for a while. There are many wolves outside, be careful. Zhao Yan raised his head and said. Cher paused and then said softly, I'll be back before dinner. Zhao Yan's voice was vague. Don't become someone else's dinner. Cher didn't hear it clearly, and Zhao Yan didn't say anything else. The two girls were walking on the beach when they bumped into Zhou Chongguang. It was the first time in 8 years that the three of them were in the same frame. Qin Mu tilted her head and whispered, We still have to divorce. Cher, think about your brother. I know you did it for me 8 years ago, but he waited for you for so long. Cher was silent for a while and sighed. Mumu, your brother already has Song Karen. And I can't be with him. As she spoke, she smiled bitterly and met the gaze of Yi Muyun, who was not far away. He had been standing alone by the sea for a long time, and suddenly saw her. Qin Mu's voice became lower. I only know that you've always been in his heart, and only you. Then she whispered, In recent years, my brother has lost a lot of weight. He always forgets to eat, and he even has stomach problems. Cher's eyes widened. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.